Ladies and gentlemen, you'd observe from the map there that Suriname is located in South America. But what is of significance to us in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean is that the people of Suriname identify more closely with the Caribbean than with South America. In my missions to Suriname, I always ask the officials, business people, trade unions, whether they see themselves more as a South American country or a Caribbean country or part of the Guyanas. And without much hesitation, they always say that they see themselves primarily as a Caribbean country. Now, the significance for us is that there is goodwill for us in Trinidad and Tobago, or potential goodwill, because the market is basically new to Trinidad and Tobago. So there's a lot of goodwill in the Suriname market for Trinidad and Tobago. Unlike my experience in some of the northern Caribbean islands, which have a very strong history of integration with Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the Caribbean, yet still there's more ambivalence there with respect to CARICOM than is the case in Suriname. So please bear this in mind, and this is something for us to promote and develop. Yeah, as you would observe there, the population, and this is how they perceive their population groupings. Yeah, you have the East Indians, or the Hindustanis, as they're called over there, the largest group, 29% of the population. Then you have the Creoles and the Maroons, which comprise 19 and 16%. The Javanese, 15%, and understand the Javanese are very popular with Trinidadians who do business. As the gentleman from Tucker will let us know. Yeah. They're very friendly people, the Javanese. Mixed, 13%, Amerindians, 4%, and others, 4%. What this indicates is that there's no one dominant group. You have 3 or 4 major groupings. And that has significance for the stability of the country as well as for the political development in the country. There's no one group dominating the other. And this is why in Suriname you'd find that government has always been coalition governments, because there's no, well, the political parties are aligned with the ethnic groups. So you'll have the Hindustani party, you'll have the party that represent the Maroons, the party that represent the Javanese people. So they have to get together, they have to work together to form the government. Which is something Trinidad and Tobago we are now beginning to get, to address our minds to. And Paramaribo is maybe about 40, 45 minutes from the airport. Most times we would not get into the hotel until maybe 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And then the business day starts at 7 o'clock. So if you know you need more time to recover, like me, I am not as young as I used to be, so I would tend to go in the day before rather than getting in that same day for meetings that day. Yeah. This is just a snapshot of the main political parties. And as you would observe, there are 51 seats in parliament. The Mega Combinatie, I'm not so sure whether I pronounced that correctly, but that's an amalgamation, that party. That has 40%, that's the single largest party. And that's the party that is headed by the current president. It has always got the most number of votes and most single party with the most seats in parliament. But they have been not in government for a long time because the other groups, they would coalesce, they would form a partnership together in order to exclude that major party. former incarnation of the president when he was a soldier. And to the right is, and the bottom right is a new image of him as president. The Chinese are very influential, very dominant in the economic development of Suriname right now. They're heavily involved in infrastructural projects, commercial and other economic projects in Suriname. And just to give a little bit of background about Suriname, Suriname became independent in 1975. And at that time, there was a massive exodus of the middle class to Holland. What I've been told is that there are more people of Suriname origin living in Holland than those living in Suriname right now. Then not long after independence, there was the military coup and then the civil war. Civil war caused a lot of dislocation and destruction of infrastructure, particularly in the rural areas. A lot of people who were living, because the war was fought mainly in the rural areas. They moved, a lot of the people moved from the rural areas into the cities. The schools were burnt, all the infrastructure burnt, and they have not fully recovered since then. The Chinese, they're doing a lot of work now in terms of infrastructural development in Suriname.
Before you leave that slide, CP, the many faces of Bautista, we also need to talk. We're here to give you as full of information as we can. We also need to talk about his less, let's say less, what's the word?
Savory.
Savory side. A former guerrilla leader, but also Desi Bautista has been convicted of drug trafficking in the Netherlands. His son, Dino Bautista, has also been convicted of drug trafficking. And there's continuing suspicion that, of course, that he still has a role in the trade. And that has yet to be substantiated in recent years, but it is clear that it is something that continues to follow him. It restricts his travel. He doesn't travel often. He travels only to places where there is no extradition treaty with the Netherlands. And he is, in some quarters, a very unsavory character. Next one. But he has been able to form a coalition with his former opponents. This gentleman, Ronnie Brunswick, was a former bodyguard of Bautista, became his opponent and his rival in the Civil War, is now a member of his coalition. Robert Amirali is the vice president of Suriname, and he is part of Brunswick's party. Amirali is very pro-business. He's been to Trinidad any number of times. He is a former chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, as it says there, interacts very well with the business sector, and has the reputation since becoming vice president as being extremely facilitative of business. In his role as vice president, he does have a key role in certain of the approval processes that are in place in Suriname. And so he certainly is a very key person for you to know, and a key person for you to be aware of as you continue to do dealings with Suriname. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk a little bit about the Surinamese economy here, and some of this was covered by in the previous presentation, and we don't want to go into too much detail. I think the previous presentation kind of set out the main elements of it. We have detail that we're providing in the presentation that will be circulated to you. But just to say that, as mentioned, GDP growth has been relatively high, certainly among the highest in CARICOM, and the projections are for that growth to continue in the 4 to 4.5% range over the next few years, with the proviso that commodity prices remain stable. The growth, there has been growing public sector debt as the government has sought to increase its services to the population. They have placed additional emphasis on trade and services, And they have also sought to encourage new foreign investment. In their trading relationships, you see this slide, I don't know if you can see the detail. This slide looks at some of their goods exports. You see a high degree of precious stones and metal exports, growing over the years from 50% in 2007 to over 60% with the latest WTO statistics. Furthermore, you see a range of imports. As this wheel is similar to what we might expect in most Caribbean countries, with a lot of imports in the transport area, machinery, metals, chemicals areas. Previous slide, please.
The previous slide. Okay.
This slide just looks at the source and destination of imports and exports. Imports, you're seeing a lot of imports from the American region, TNT prominent, according to the WTO, 26% of imports from Trinidad and Tobago in 2011 as opposed to 18% in 2007. Some displacement, in fact, perhaps of the United States in that period where U.S. exports actually declined by 2 to 3% in that period according to the WTO reckoning. Also, we see a contraction of exports from Europe into Suriname. Overall, this summary provided by Rabobank of the Netherlands points out some of the areas that we think are common, are almost leitmotifs as we go further into our discussion on doing business with Suriname. One is the very narrow economic base. Gold is so prominent in their economy and so critical to their budget situation and their ability to provide services to the economy. Public finances relatively healthy because of that. A consistent balance of payments, surplus. However, weak institutions, and honestly, that is one of the elements that we have to stress with Suriname, that institutional development has been lacking in the last number of years. For example, we did a project there 3 years ago with respect to the investment climate. We were told confidently by senior officials in the Ministry of Trade and with responsibility for creation of an investment promotion agency that this would be done within the year. We were told that the Investment Act would be revised within the year because of the focus on attracting investment. Neither of those events has occurred.
Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons for the weak administrative framework is that Suriname lost a lot of their professionals at the time of independence, 1975, and they have not recovered since then. There was a massive exodus of Surinamese to Holland around that time. And then that was followed by the Civil War and the other disruptions within Suriname.
Yeah, so just some brief statistics. Again, we talked about the growth. The World Bank perceives it as an upper middle income countries, just like Trinidad and Tobago. GDP growth has been fairly standard and consistent in the last few years, around 4%, and is projected to continue in that vein. Inflation is low. They've made a lot of progress in reducing inflation over the last few years. Again, these slides just point to the dominance of commodity prices and commodity trade in the Surinamese economy. You see the trade balance is significant and continuing to increase due primarily to commodity exports. Alumina, gold, the concentrated nature of the production structure in Suriname is notable. One mine, Rosabelle mine, produces 40% of the gold produced by Suriname. The pricing has been stable, at least in the gold, and that has supported the economic growth, as we've said. Alumina prices have not been as consistent, and as such has caused some challenges to that part of the economy. The IMF, looking at this situation, in its article and in its consultation with Suriname last year, developed several projections for the economy based on the price of gold. And we see here that with the price in the region as it is at the moment, $1,200 per ounce, you're looking at consistent growth over the period. The IMS have suggested that the economy has to do, the Surinamese government has to do a better job of controlling expenditures. In recent years, expenditures have increased, and the risk of higher budget imbalances is real. Exports, again, the prominence of gold, approximately 60%, more than 68% of exports in 2013. The two bauxite mines, a single alumina refinery, the refinery, Suriname refinery, has a significant capacity. Oil, again, we're not going to spend too much time on this. The Export TT presentation covered this. Suriname has significant hydroelectric power. I remember Dax will remember when we did the energy services project there, when we visited the power plant in Paramaribo, it's totally silent. I was nonplussed. I was wondering, is there electricity? But it's due to the total use of hydropower. So hydropower accounts for the vast majority of the electricity usage in Suriname. Okay, I'm sorry for this slide. Unfortunately, you really can't read it. Looking at some of the issues relating to investing and trading, though, with Suriname. The investment climate, as you've heard and we're going to talk about, is extremely open. There aren't any performance requirements. There are a range of tax incentives and non-tax incentives for investment. It's not very clear, though, because even though they have made some progress in recent years in putting these incentives into law, as I mentioned, the new revised Investment Act has not, in fact, been passed as yet. And CP, you have some information about some recent developments. Yes,
there is an investment ordinance that has recently been enacted. It enters into force on the 15th of this month, but that is limited to reduction of import duties for goods that are to be used in manufacturing. So it's an incentive to manufacturers.
The government is continuing to improve its trading and investment environment. It's seeking to simplify the rules which various studies have established are among the worst in the region in terms of establishing a business. It takes a long time. There have been, the Export TT document makes reference to improvements relating to action in the energy sector, and that's welcome. Overall, though, investment in other areas tends to take much longer to accomplish than other countries in the region. We mentioned the revision of the investment law, which has been ongoing for some time. The information base has to improve, and the government is also seeking to enhance consumer protection. A lot of these activities have to do with the recent reviews at the World Trade Organization. Continuing with respect to investment, there aren't any restrictions on transfers. In fact, even though there are approval requirements from the central bank, it has not been the experience of most investors that the bank does restrict transfers. The Foreign Exchange Commission of the central bank approves all transfers, but it does so as a matter of course from our investigation. As we mentioned, there is no investment promotion agency. And there is significant room for ministerial discretion in decision making. Clive is going to talk a little bit later about the labor laws. The labor laws are a concern when it comes to hiring and firing Surinamese, and Clive is going to go into more detail about that. One of the things, as Clive mentioned, that we've seen over the years is this growing Chinese involvement. When we did the study on the investment climate, Clive, how many persons were at the Chinese embassy?
Oh, yeah. 15 economists only. Economists only at the Chinese embassy in Suriname. And that's mainly to promote investment, Chinese investment. Yeah, 15 economists. Trinidad and Tobago, let's say our embassy in Washington may only have about 4 officers.
4 officers.
Not economists, 4 officers. Yeah. I doubt whether we have more than 4 officers to service Washington, an important embassy as Washington. Whereas the Chinese have 15 economists.
China's been...
And this does not include the other diplomatic staff
Right.
to deal with other matters. This is just to deal with promotion, trade and economic promotion, 15 economists.
Yeah, China has been providing significant budgetary support in terms for infrastructural development to the Suriname government. Some have raised some concern about that, not only with respect to their growing involvement, particularly in the resources there, but also for the effect that will have on the balances of the Surinamese government.
Yeah, and as we spoke about, we mentioned the Chinese embassy. We should bear in mind that we have an honorary consul in Suriname. His office is very close to the Chamber of Commerce. And in your mission, you should ensure that you make contact very early. His name is Mr. Rudy Hung, or Thung Ahong, Hung. And I can give you details of his telephone number, etc. Yeah. But it would be important. He would be very useful in terms of making contacts with other agencies and explaining the system in Suriname. Because bear in mind that most of the documentation you would see in Suriname would be in Dutch. And I do not know how fluent your Dutch is. There are some translations in English, but my experience is that those translations are not too reliable. They're not too reliable, particularly translations of their laws. They're not reliable at all.
Yeah. The point that you made during our previous discussion about being understood and the age element.
Yeah. And it's always important to ensure that you are being understood when you're having discussions with your Surinamese counterpart, right? Because you may get the impression that you are understood, but you may not be understood. So that is very important. Another point is that English is widely spoken over there, particularly among people under, I would say, 60. The very few people I've encountered who do not speak English are those who are above 60. And they're professional people. They're above 60. But generally, English is spoken.
On this slide, we really just want to talk about the available opportunity. Skilled labor is a challenge. We found that various labor market studies have found that. Our surveys in the investment climate and other documentation that we've reviewed shows that with respect to skilled labor, there are shortages within Suriname, shortages which Clive has explained, and part of the reason Clive has explained, but also the heavy role of the public sector.
Yeah, heavy role of, yeah. The employers, they complain about that the private sector employs a lot of people in very unproductive jobs. And they believe that the public sector, and they believe that those people, the private sector, should not be employing such large numbers in unproductive jobs because it affects the supply of labor to the private sector. And I recall in asking the people in Suriname why it is that they start work at 7, and in some cases 7:30, and finish work at 3. And the offices are closed at 3 o'clock. And that's to facilitate their massive tertiary education drive. The university in Suriname, it's only accommodate part-time students. They do not have classes in the morning. Most of their classes are in after work. So a lot of people who are, a lot of employees, they're also students.
Particularly public sector.
Yeah, particularly in the public sector. And private sector as well, yeah.
Just a couple more slides from relating to the investment climate. These were some of the findings of the study that we found that we did there a few years ago. Clive's mentioned the translation of laws, the need to finalize the Investment Act and modernize legislation. These continue to be challenges. There are active efforts to harmonize their laws with CARICOM. When we had discussions with them about the Investment Act, we were told that they were trying to ensure that it was totally in keeping with the provisions of the CARICOM Investment Code, which was then being developed. Of course, the code hasn't been developed, so, well, perhaps that's one reason why their act hasn't been finalized. One of the challenges that we have as consultants, and I have as a trade official and negotiator interacting with Suriname, is just understanding the different legal systems. When, just a point from our negotiating experience, as we negotiate agreements, particularly in services, we do have challenges in understanding the legal system, in ensuring that we have adequate translations of the documentation, and ensuring that we have the right participation in our preparations for negotiations, to ensure that we understand very well the English-based legal system. The system in Suriname is different. Well, Clive is going to talk about the dismissal decree, which continues to be a challenge, and we've mentioned that there is a continuing need to improve the road network outside of the capital. Suriname is not very integrated in the international economy. Apart from the ongoing trading relationships, of course, other CARICOM countries tend to have more bilateral investment agreements. Suriname only has 2, or perhaps 3. We found one mention of an agreement with the Czech Republic, but we were never able to find that actual agreement. But so let's say there are 2 BITs, Indonesia and Netherlands. Not surprising based on what you've heard about the makeup of the economy of the country and the linkages with these 2 countries. It's a member of CARICOM for a long time, 1995, but the integration within CARICOM, it is continuing to be a work in progress. So for example, they're not part of the CARICOM Double Taxation Treaty, which is relevant to service providers. So you may have to pay taxes both in Suriname and in Trinidad and Tobago on the business that you do there. It's something to be aware of. They are part of the Economic Partnership Agreement that we signed with Europe five years ago, and other CARICOM agreements, bilateral trade agreements. They are active in the current negotiations with Canada, so they are increasingly integrated within the CARICOM framework. And that has been a conscious decision, as Clive mentioned, by the Surinamese government. With respect to the single market and economy, there are some signposts here. They fully apply the provisions of the common external tariff. If you're sending goods to Suriname, you do need the standard CARICOM invoice and certificate of origin. With respect to services, as mentioned, there are no work permit requirements. Restrictions on movement of CARICOM nationals have been eliminated, even though not necessarily in legislatively wise. Suriname has made administrative provision for a number of the CARICOM rules relating to movement of persons, and the document from Export TT that you will receive speaks a lot about the movement of skilled persons and the provisions and how you can benefit from that with respect to Suriname. As a CARICOM company, you do have the right of establishment, and they do fully adhere to that. Suriname is the host of the Caribbean Competition Commission. They do now have a Deputy Secretary General, and with respect to the Caribbean Court of Justice, while they don't adhere to the appellate jurisdiction of the Court of Justice, they actually have had experience on the original jurisdiction of the court relating to implementation of the CSME. And in fact, they've been on the losing end of 2 cases one with Trinidad Cement Limited and the other with National Flour Mills, relating to their actions relating to imports of flour and flour and cement from other countries, which have impacted on the trade of these 2 national companies.
Yeah. Although there is freedom of movement of workers, we should bear in mind that their certification system is a bit different from the rest of the Caribbean. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, Larry. The certification system.
as a professional, one of the things that CARICOM has been trying to do in implementing the CSME is to try to unify the rules relating to the registration and licensing of professionals, engineers, architects, etc. Now, in Suriname, not in Suriname, let's just deal with Suriname. In Suriname, there is not in place a law, such as in place here, relating to the registration of engineers. So the registration, for example, of engineers is done through the Ministry of Trade. And in fact, the current Vice President, Robert Amarelli, has a significant role in approving licenses for engineers. That is obviously not what one would like to see, but it is a fact of life in dealing with Suriname, that the rules aren't so clear. There have been concerns concerns among professionals in Suriname that Mr. Amarelli has not necessarily performed this function in a uniform way, favoring certain investors over others, and impacting on certain projects within the energy sector and the non-energy sector.
But these are issues that could be raised when applying for a license.
Yeah. The banking sector in Suriname is fairly open, it's fairly strong. The three big main banks there, the Suriname Bank, RBC, formerly RBTT, and Hakrin Bank. Republic Bank of Trinidad and Tobago recently and continues to seek to gain controlling interest of Hakrin Bank. Recently, the matter was discussed in the Surinamese National Assembly, and the decision was taken not to proceed at the moment with the Republic purchase of controlling interest in Hakrin Bank. Republic Bank says it continues to have an interest in Hakrin Bank and continues to have discussions with the Surinamese government to effect this purchase. Of course, that's not necessarily in keeping with with the CSME, but the reason given is the control of key national assets. So the top three banks in Suriname control 78% of the banking. As I mentioned, the sector is sound, it's liquid, but there is relatively low lending to the private sector, an issue that has been raised by the World Bank, the IMF, as well as local entities within Suriname seeking access to the high liquidity within the market. I want to talk about the public sector. Clive, you want to take this?
The view of the business sector in Suriname is that the public sector is heavily oversized. And that there's excessive centralized decision making, there's weak accountability, weak public sector management, and a lack of transparency. The private sector, they complain that they have problems in recruiting labor, serious problems in recruiting labor because of government employment policies.
Well, you mentioned, as opposed to the role of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce, with which it was mentioned I have a relationship. In Suriname, if you're going to do business there, you have to become a member of the chamber. The chamber, so you apply to do business in Suriname, you go through the chamber, you become a member, they they control all aspects of the business registration, as well as the business names, etc., the actions that are done here by the Ministry of Legal Affairs. They control business names, registration. You become a member, you pay annual dues to the chamber. It's a key first stop for an investor, and as Clive mentioned, it's really we have the address there just for ease of reference, but certainly as opposed to Trinidad and Tobago, where you can do business without necessarily joining the Energy Chamber, although we highly encourage you to, or any other business organization. With respect to Suriname, you must become part of the Surinamese Chamber.
And this applies both to local businesses as well as foreign businesses.
If you want to
the only exceptions are in the agriculture sector.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of the agriculture sector, you must register with the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah. Just for the sake of information there, Clive, I mean, the port structure in Suriname is different than ours. There are significant private ports relating to the mining industries. The main port, of course, is in Paramaribo. And this is some data relating to how it compares with regional ports.
Yeah. And one thing of significance is that there's a direct link between Point Lisas and the major port in Suriname. I think they have 3 sailings per week.
The services sector is receiving additional attention from the government, as was mentioned earlier. It accounts for at least 60% of GDP, at least 73% of employment. But as we mentioned, procedures need to be enhanced. We mentioned the procedure for licensing of professionals. With respect to energy services, Suriname has not made any international commitments relating to services incidental to mining, so the kind of support services for mining or energy development, but it is open with respect to its engineering sector. It has no restrictions on foreign involvement, with the proviso, of course, that you do need to be licensed and registered. Now, this section, we're going to talk a bit about some of the cultural aspects of doing business in Suriname, and we're very interested to hear from you as well from Roger and others who have interacted with Suriname. This academic, Erin Meyer, has developed a tool which she calls the culture map, and she assesses. Go down, CP. She assesses cultural interaction using eight elements. She assesses communicating, evaluating, persuading, leading, deciding, trusting, disagreeing, and scheduling. And she compares this across cultures. It's a comparative scale. It is not scientific. Well, in developing her data, she did do surveys in various countries, but it's not necessarily scientific. But we think it's a useful way to discuss what we think are elements that you will need to be aware of in doing business in Suriname. Right. Yeah, so next, the first point is communication. Meyer considers low context and high context communication. In low context cultures, communication is clear, simple, explicit, precise. And what you say is what is received by your listener. If you do need to repeat, it's simply for clarification. In high context societies, the communication is a little bit more sophisticated and nuanced. It's my view that Suriname is much more a low context society for communication than a high context one. Mm-hmm. And CP, if you disagree, or when you disagree, jump in. Yeah. Huh? In terms of evaluating offers, is the society frank in telling you, no, I do not think this proposal will meet my needs, or are they less frank and tending to lead you along? Again, my view here is that the Surinamese business culture is very more aligned towards the direct negative. If there's an interest, they will say, and perhaps that's the Dutch background to their interactions, because in Europe that's very much how the Dutch, Germans are. Very direct. If they don't see an interest, they will tell you. They won't string you along. Now, how do you persuade or seek to persuade your interlocutor? With respect to Suriname, Meyer talks about principles first. So do you look at different elements of an argument? So do you point out the different benefits of your process or your company? Or do you look at how your company holistically address your needs of your interlocutor? We think here that in Suriname, they're a little bit more towards the applications first than principles based in thinking. Suriname, in our view, is more hierarchical than here, even though, as we point out, there's the history of collaboration in the political sphere. There have been also a tradition of strong leaders, and we talked about the hierarchical decision-making structure and centralized decision-making within the public sector. Mm-hmm. In terms of making decisions, there is the consensual approach in the sense to perhaps discussing decisions, but certainly it's more top-down. So the minister, the vice president, the president, the head of the organization is going to have a lot more say in the eventual decision than in some other cultures, in the region even. Surinamese, we think, are more trusting based on task-based. You know, if we work well together, we are trustful. Now, being Caribbean in alignment, there is also an element of relationship-based. So we have known from our personal experience the importance of personal relationships. And of course, in trading services, relations are extremely important. So on this scale, we have Suriname sort of in between the two. If they disagree with you, though, this element discusses in the context of decision-making and in the context of an organization, how they deal with confrontation. We think here that Suriname is more confrontational. I think because of the history of collaboration, the different ethnic groups, etc., the mixing of they tend to be more tolerant of disagreement within a team. And they think that generally it can be helpful in terms of arriving at the right decision, even though at the end, the decision might be taken from the top down. Scheduling, again, the mix between the European and the Caribbean. On the one hand, you would think that based on the European, the Dutch influence, they're very linear, that they do adhere strictly to time. But our experience has been that they tend to be more flexible. I mean, for example, projects that we did there which required us to meet several persons during the course of the day. And I don't know if your schedule during the trade mission will be like that, where you have to travel within Paramaribo to different appointments. They tend to be tolerant if you're late. They know the difficulty in getting around within the city, for example. So they do tend to be tolerant, and they do tend to be more kind toward late coming than perhaps might be expected.
Yeah, and they tend to be very helpful as well, because if in your schedule, if you do not have a particular individual to meet with, and they think that it's useful for you to meet that person, they would make that arrangement for you. That has been my experience. Yeah.
Okay. So this is how we put Suriname on these scale. Very much in between, relating to scheduling, the decision-making top-down, more relationship-based, relating to trusting and developing relationships. But certainly on the other side, very direct in communicating, very direct in their negative feedback providing to you, and they more tend to be principles-based in respect to persuading and how you persuade them in your map. Now this is our interaction. This is based on our interaction with Suriname over a number of years, and you could probably develop a slightly different scale if you were to do a study of businesses dealing with Suriname. It might be interesting to see how businesses in Trinidad and Tobago view interaction with our state agencies. ICT area is weak in Suriname. So you may be accustomed to a certain level of ICT here. In Suriname, you don't expect it. You will not receive the same level of ICT delivery. You see this level, this scale here. I think we are ranked on this particular Global Information Technology Report scale. We're ranked at 72. Suriname is significantly lower than ours, but you'll find the internet availability relatively low. You'll find the speed relatively low. You'll find relatively high costs in the sector. Again, just to enhance the discussion on the IT side, Suriname scores very low on this ICT scale relating to various elements of ICT development. One area there in terms of interaction, in terms of doing research in Suriname, a continuing challenge. Generally, there is little attention paid to the web. Companies either don't have websites or have very underdeveloped websites. Getting information out of Suriname is a continuing challenge. Clive's going to talk about the legal element.
Some of the key features of the legal environment for us in Trinidad and Tobago would be identify 5. The first would be that the revised Treaty of Chagaramas applies to Suriname. They must observe that revised treaty because it's a member of CARICOM, right? And CARICOM is moving towards harmonization of laws, certain laws relating to investments, laws relating to trade, laws relating to labor, etc. And Suriname is moving to, and CARICOM Secretariat has developed a lot of model legislation that Suriname is considering at the moment. Right? We mentioned that there's no investment code in Suriname right now. The last code had expired in 2006, and the intention of Suriname was to incorporate the model law on investments coming out of CARICOM, to incorporate that as their investment code. However, there has been a delay at the level of CARICOM in finalizing its investment code. And so the Suriname investment code now is in abeyance. There is a draft based on an earlier CARICOM draft code, but the information we have been given is that the Suriname government is awaiting the completion of the CARICOM exercise before it finalizes its investment code. And of course, there's freedom of movement of labor, the right to establish business, no duties, common external tariff that would apply, right? So these are advantages for businesses coming out of Trinidad and Tobago. It's a civil law jurisdiction against the rest of the CARICOM, which have common law jurisdictions. The difference is essentially that in the common law jurisdictions, a lot of the legal principles develop out of decisions of the court, right? And superimposed on that would be the statutes. In Suriname, the law is based on detailed codes. So there'll be a civil code, a criminal code, an investment code, a labor code, which will be very, very detailed. However, the courts, the decisions tend to be very consistent because the court will not deal with every single situation. So there's still some element for the courts to take decisions based on the case before them. So there's this element of common law development within their legal system. The laws are in Dutch, as we said, with no official English translation, and this poses a great challenge for us in Trinidad and Tobago doing business in Suriname. Right? There are one or two, you would see on the internet, one or two translations, English translations of the laws, but when I read those translations and I have discussions with the officials in Suriname, I've realized that those translations are very unreliable. I pay little attention to the unofficial translations. And I think one thing that the business community and certainly the state agencies in Trinidad could do within CARICOM is to push for some of the major laws in Suriname to be translated in English, to have official translations in English, particularly those that involve business development, trade with the Caribbean region. Yeah. And as you said, the investment code, it has lapsed and it has not been replaced as yet. Although it has lapsed, what has taken place in Suriname right now is that the kinds of incentives that businesses would require. It's not based on the law because the law has lapsed, but it's subject to negotiations with the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Trade and Industry. So when you're applying for your license with the Ministry of Trade, or if you have to get a license from the Ministry of Energy, at that stage you would negotiate for the type of incentives that you require, because it's not in the labor code. It's not in the investment code. There's no investment code. So you have to negotiate with the ministers as to what you would need to have a viable business in Suriname. So don't look to the law, the code, to tell you what incentives you would be entitled to. You have to negotiate that.
And flowing from that, CP, is the need to have an effective representative within Suriname.
Yeah, that is important. To have an effective either attorney or business representative in Suriname. And the person who can assist you with that would be our honorary consul in Suriname. He'd be able to advise you, given your type of business, the type of business you have, who would be the appropriate person to represent your interest in Suriname. Starting a business, as we indicated earlier, you must register with the Chamber of Commerce. Now, if you want to have a presence, you must also have a trade license, right? And the trade license is received from the Ministry of Trade. But before you can get a trade license, you must register with the Chamber of Commerce. So the first step is registration with the Chamber of Commerce, and then the second step would be to apply to either the Ministry of Trade for most licenses and the Ministry of Energy. They would be the authority for certain energy-related licenses. If you...
Sorry, I was just going to say, the Chamber seeks to kind of operate a one-stop shop. So once you go to the Chamber, they will tend to help you with these other licenses that you seek to.
Yeah. If you need to incorporate a business in Suriname or have a foreign branch in Suriname, you must register with the Ministry of Justice, right, to incorporate your business in Suriname. And you must have articles of association. Market access, well, national treatment for CARICOM nationals and companies, we mentioned that earlier. Larry had mentioned that there's no performance requirements. You negotiate for your incentives and benefits, and the government procurement system is pretty open. And in some cases, there would be selective tender. Some tenders would be in English, particularly for projects financed by international agencies. Some would be in Dutch. In terms of employment, Suriname is a heavily unionized environment. Close to 2/3 of the workers in Suriname belong to a union, close to 2/3, which contrasts with the rest of the Caribbean, where maybe most countries would be around 30%, 40% at the higher level. However, the unions in Suriname are house unions, in-house unions or associations. They are linked with a federation, and there are 6 major federations. The federations are not involved in negotiations at the level of the company. They would be more concerned with things like the labor code and other more strategic issues, labor policy, etc. Most employers in Suriname, they have provisions which deal with strikes in their collective bargaining. There would be a bonus offered in the event that workers do not take strike action. And it's my information is that it's quite an incentive. It's a good incentive for the workers. So you can negotiate that with the trade union. Persons with CARICOM skills certificate are exempt from the work permit requirements. When you employ a worker in Suriname, you must give that employer as a written statement of his working conditions. Basically, things like his wages, whether it's paid weekly, quarterly, probation period, vacation leave, sick leave, etc. With respect to your probation, if you do not stipulate a probationary period in your contract, if you do not stipulate a probationary period, the worker's probation would be deemed to be 2 months. So please bear that in mind. If you set up a business in Suriname and you need to employ workers in Suriname, make sure that in your contract with that employee, you mention something about probation. Because if you do not mention anything, the law would presume that the probationary period is 2 months. And there's a dismissal decree in Suriname, and in my research, it's not unique to Suriname alone. I think the Netherlands also has a dismissal decree, plus St. Martin and Curaçao and Aruba. What the decree says is that before an employer can dismiss an employee, you must apply to the dismissal board. You must apply to the dismissal board for permission to dismiss the worker. There are some exceptions which I'll come to just now, but you must apply to, and that's a big issue with the business community in Suriname. They say that is too inflexible. Although the code states that the matter should be determined within 21 days. The practice is that in some cases, these matters are not determined before 3 months. Generally, 3 months have been told, and in some cases, it could go as long as 6 months. Right? How the employers in Suriname have dealt with that, whenever you have any law that is unfair, the group that is affected, they always find some means of addressing the unfairness in the particular law. What the employers have told me in Suriname is that they no longer offer permanent appointments, or permanent appointments to workers. They employ workers on short-term contracts, like for a year or 6 months, and at the end of that year, if they're satisfied, they roll over, they renew the contract. So if they have a worker that they're not satisfied with, instead of having to go through the trouble of applying to a dismissal board for permission to dismiss a worker, they know that at the end of that year, they can get rid of the worker by not renewing the contract. Now, the employer can dismiss for what is considered urgent reasons, but you must go to the dismissal board, and the dismissal board is given 4 days to indicate whether you can dismiss for urgent reasons. And here's what are some of the urgent reasons. It would be misleading employer by providing false information or submitting false or forged documents to influence recruitment. So if you submitted a forged certificate, the employer can dismiss, but he still has to go to the board, but the board will take 4 days. And this board is a tripartite board. It's made up of representatives from the employers, the trade unions, and the government. Serious lack of skills or competencies, drunkenness or other misbehavior of the worker, theft, embezzlement, fraud, or other criminal offenses related to the workplace, breach of trust, threats to the employer, his family or colleagues, damage to the employer's property, breach of confidentiality by the worker, and negligence. All right? The worker must give notice to an employer if he wants to terminate the employment before the end of the contract. The employee must give notice to the employer. And that's a major issue in all the Caribbean countries. They argue that, the law would state that the employer must give notice, and if he does not give notice, there's a penalty imposed on the employer. But In the case of employee, while the employee must give notice, there's no penalty imposed on the employee, but the Suriname labor code has a penalty on the employee if he leaves, if he terminates the contract without giving the employer the requisite notice. Yeah. The dismissal decree, it's a big issue, as I mentioned, with the employers. They say that that's one of the disincentive for doing business in Suriname. I know that the government is considering whether that dismissal decree should be revoked. But as it stands right now, there are no immediate plans to have it revoked. So please bear in mind that if you set up your business in Suriname and you need to employ people in Suriname, please bear this in mind, that it's not easy to dismiss a worker summarily in Suriname. You have to apply to the dismissal board. And in some cases, when we went to this, one of the banks, we were told that there was a worker in that particular bank whose application for dismissal was before the board for more than 9 months. That might be an extreme case, but it can happen. It has happened.
And he was involved in criminal activity.
Yeah.
He's actually charged with a crime.
Yeah. Non-residents can open accounts in foreign currency in Suriname. In terms of international transfer of payments, normally it's not a difficulty, but you must get the Foreign Exchange Commission approval for transferring more than, I think it's $5,000 and the equivalent in euros. And there's a legal framework in place for anti-money laundering, similar to what exists in Trinidad and Tobago, although the administration might be not as advanced as we are. Suriname is a member of the Caribbean Anti-Money Laundering Task Force, and they are monitored, and certain recommendations are made every year. So there's a program in place for developing anti-money laundering measures in Suriname. Dispute settlement, arbitration is very popular in Suriname as a means of settling disputes. Or you can go to the court. Suriname is a member of the New York Convention on Recognition and Enforcement of Foreign Arbitral Awards, and it's a member of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Suriname. So if you have a dispute that's related to any right that you have under the CARICOM agreement, or if you think that the Surinamese government have breached the Treaty of Chagaramas, you can always go to the Caribbean Court of Justice.
And as I mentioned, they've already lost 2 cases at the CCJ relating to their actions relating to the CSM. Yeah.
Intellectual property, they are members of the major intellectual property treaties. And there is a Bureau for Intellectual Property in Suriname. But the administration is considered to be weak. Administration of intellectual property laws in Suriname is considered to be very weak. And please bear in mind that if you're going into Suriname, at least have your trademark registered so that you can get that protection in the Surinamese market. Doing business ranking.
Yeah, these next few slides talk review some of the doing business rankings of Suriname, both as a whole globally, as this slide does, and you see very low rankings in certain areas, even though we've very low ranking in 2014 and 13 and starting a business, even though, as we mentioned, there has been improvements, and the Export TT document mentions there have been improvements relating to the energy sector. Again, registering a property, credit availability, investor protection, relatively weak, as well as contractual enforcement. Of course, these persons might have some issues with some of these some of these topics, but they are the only comparable international data that we do have available. And as we go through, the next slide looks at how Suriname ranks within the region. And on this first slide, you're not going to see Suriname. On the next slide, you will. So down at the bottom, within the Latin America and Caribbean region, relating to doing business and these elements that the World Bank considers important for businesses interacting with the economy. Some of the issues that we've mentioned recur here, and it is the reality, I guess, of Suriname in relation to doing business there. But, Clive, next slide. Suriname also is relatively low among the regions in terms of the various competitiveness indicators. Even below Guyana, you see Trinidad and Tobago a little bit above Suriname, not significantly, so we don't have much to talk about there. But in competitiveness, doing business, relatively low, a little bit higher with respect to competitiveness in the moderate level, but overall, Suriname does have work to do in a number of these international measures. And it really, but on the other hand, if you're going to do business there, it's relatively cheap. It is one of the least expensive countries in the region to do continuing business, to live, to work for your employees, etc. So on the positive side, there is that. Overall, there are 2 points that we wanted to make from this presentation. One is the CARICOM nature, the Caribbean feel of Suriname, the people, the government, the commitment to CARICOM. That certainly is a positive. And secondly, that Suriname, despite these challenges, really provides a real opportunity for you. Based on that approach, the support for the Caribbean movement, and their willingness to encourage investment from CARICOM and interaction with CARICOM and Trinidad and Tobago in particular.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to what Larry has said, given the differences in terms of the language, right, and the fact that most of their regulations would not be in English, you would definitely need to have some representative in Suriname to assist you in pursuing your business interests in Suriname. And the honorary consul, Trinidad and Tobago honorary consul, he would be able to guide you appropriately. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.